your family seems to stay a lot in Jackson County.
Now, is this something that anybody can come in and get, or how do you go about getting one of these if someone's searching?
We have blank ones here they can come and pick up, and that's what we recommend they do. They start with themselves. You've got to start with you and then work your way back generation by generation. If you skip a generation, you're probably going to make a mistake, possibly pick up the wrong person. I know everybody wants to be related to somebody who's famous and important, but that's not always true. Sometimes they're infamous and dangerous, but
you have to be careful what you find when
you
you start
do.
looking. Well, is there any charge for any of this?
No. Anybody can come in and pick it up. We're glad to give them some advice about it. We have some books they can check out on how to do the basic parts of it. We even have a password they can get here if they have a Hall County Library card, and they can do some of the research in line at home.
Outstanding. Now the pedigree chart. What other tools can they use here at the library? I see a population schedule here.
This is actually a census schedule right here. What I did was I went back and I found in the 1930 census, I found your relatives, and you start going back year by year. 1930 is the most recent one that's been issued. The 1941 will be issued in about 2 or 3 years. They do that so far back because of privacy issues. In other words, they were planning on you being dead when it was released. We're living longer now, so that's not always happening. But we can find all sorts of information in here. What people did depending on the year that the census was taken, whether they had a radio or not, if they owned their house.
Really? Oh, now that would be really interesting to know how they lived, lived during those times.
It adds some meat to the skeleton.
Well, now, in the books here, of course, the Titshaw Chronic Families of America book, and I see another book here, and I've also, in doing a little research of my own, found other books. Now, how are those things categorized here in the library where you can find, or can you? How do you go about finding?
Okay. We have the Hall County marriage books and will books on microfilm, the older ones, and when I say older, I mean 1900 to back where the county started. We have those here. The others are actually still over in the courthouse, so you can use them. You just have to use them during courthouse hours. We have some history books of Hall County. We are trying desperately, as the budget allows and as things are published, to get the will books, marriage book, newspaper, index books for surrounding counties for the entire state of Georgia. And then we're actually going up the East Coast and following the migration paths going into North Carolina, South Carolina, Virginia, up into Maryland, because that's where a lot of the ports were, and they came down. So
well, that's interesting. I think in looking at my family, I think Philadelphia to South Carolina before they got to Georgia, so I think a lot of them migrated along the same lines.
Yes, I saw where some of you just came through South Carolina.
Yes, ma'am. Well, now, is there anything else that you can do here that, as far as searching for that, or is this kind of what we have, or?
What we want to do is everybody needs to start with one of these to give you a good jumping point right here. Once you get back to 1930s, we can do the censuses, and that's what I want to show you next. I want to show you how to use Ancestry Library Edition, which is a database that the library provides, and you can use here in the building or any of our branches.
Great. Thank you, Rhonda. Rhonda, what kind of things is it that we can find on the computer here? How do we do this? Okay,
what we've come and done is gone to Ancestry Library Edition, which is one of the databases the county pays for. And we are going to start with the 1930 census, since that's the most recent one that's been released. And we are going to look for your Grandpa Clyde. Now, what I did was I typed in his name, first name, last name. We know he's in Jackson County. We know he was actually in the town of Houston, so we put that in. But we don't want to get too much information because that can confuse the system and you might actually miss something that you're looking for. This is what has come up right here. We're looking at the state of Georgia, Jackson County, Houston Town, and what we are going to do is actually scroll down here.
Okay,
and there he is right there. He lived on Oak Street.
And this was when he was 26 years old. My grandmother was 22.
Right.
It's hard to imagine your grandparents at that age.
And they already had a couple of kids in the household. They had Clyde Jr. and George. And it says over here that your grandpa was 18 when they got married. Your grandmother was 15.
15. Unbelievable. Unbelievable.
And they also, let's see here. I'm going to look at this right here so I can read the headings on it. It tells us here that they had a house and it was valued at $700. So they're telling us a good bit of information here. He was a fairly prosperous fellow. Over here we're seeing...
It'd be nice if you could buy one for that now.
Wouldn't it though? And a good one. It's telling us that these are where they were born and where his parents and her parents were born, so we know we've got a good old-fashioned Georgia family going here. We're going to slide on over just a little bit more, and we're going to see that he was a barber for a living. They didn't have any occupations listed for her, and he owned his own shop. And you said that was Dixie?
Well, no, actually at one time he had his own shop, but prior to that he was in the Dixie Hunt basement with John Hooper and a lot of the other old-time barbers that were there off the square.
So you never know what you're going to find out about these people.
Wow.
Also, remember, when you're looking at this information, you always want to look 10 houses above and 10 houses below. That's because these are literally taken as people go down the street. The census taker literally walked down the street or a dirt road and took the census.
So you can see who their next door neighbors were.
See who their neighbors were. And
wow.
Back then they didn't have a lot of time for courting, and they didn't have a lot of mobility for courting, so they would marry the farmer's daughter next door or down the street or whatever.
That makes
So
sense.
if you're not looking at a relative, you might be looking at one in another generation.
Wow. That is great. It makes perfect sense. And you wasn't traveling very far back in those days. And
it's amazing what we can find out. Just think what they're going to be able to find out about us.
I kind of shudder to think, actually, but okay.
Yes, that's rather scary. But you can find out all sorts of things. He owned the barber shop. He owned the grocery store. That one owned a farm. So
wow.
You never know. But we're going to go back a little bit farther, and I'm going to show you how the actual microfilm works.
Okay.
And
great.
that we're going to look at your relatives back in the 1910 census.
Wonderful. Okay, Rhonda, and what is this we're seeing now? Now, this is an earlier census?
This is an earlier census. This is actually on microfilm. I want to show you two different ways of looking at things. This is actually the 1910 census. We've gone back one generation. We're going to be looking at Clyde's parents. So we're actually looking at Washington Ambrose Cronick and his wife Alice Lee. And we have found them here on the 13th census, which is 1910. Again, we're in Georgia, Jackson County. They're still in Houston District, but right now what we are looking at is going to be Wash, which is what he went by instead of Washington, A. Cronick, and his brood of family right here.
Now, that's a large family.
Pretty good family. It actually asks on here the number of children she's given birth to and the number of children that are alive at the taking of the census. She's actually given birth to 12 children. 8 of them are still alive when the census was taken. So you can find out from there. We don't know whether they died in childbirth, infancy, was there an accident, there was a lot of illness at that time, they could have passed away. So from that we'll look at cemetery records, see if, when they passed away, if there was a plague or anything going on.
Okay, and then these larger families, now that was kind of representative of families that did farming, wasn't it?
Yes, and yours was a farmer. It actually says right here on this that he was